Good evening, everyone. I am delighted to be able to be in your presence in any way. And I want you to know how much I miss you. I think about you. I pray for you regularly. And I wish I could be there in person. But my thanks to Steve and to Tim for making it possible for me to do this. And I hope it will be acceptable in what we're trying to do tonight. I have been so blessed, and you're the big part of the blessing. I want to thank you for so many things. I want to thank you for all the prayers, for the calls, visits, food, other things that you have so graciously done for me. I appreciate it deeply. And I want to give a special thanks to the guys who run the AV room. You don't know how much you please me and how much you help me, particularly on Sundays, when you open the video and the audio while the people are coming in and while they're going out, and I sit and watch every bit of it. I love it, being able to see you, and I sure wish I could be there. My mobility is limited. My kids get me out some, but it's awkward to do and not easy to get in and out of the cars and that kind of thing. So we pick our places and they get me out some, but I wish I could be there with you. Thank you for all you do for me. As you know, this summer we've had a special series about biblical characters who have had failures, but great successes. I am delighted to have the character that I was assigned to talk to you about tonight. We're talking about Moses. And in my judgment, of all the people in Scripture, other than Jesus himself, Moses perhaps has the greatest resume that you can find. Think about it. Not only did God choose him to deliver his people from the Egyptian bondage, but down the Sinai Peninsula, and gave them the law through him. And then that became a focal thing throughout the history of the people of Israel. When you get to the book of Daniel, repeatedly, Daniel talks not so much about the law of God, but the law of Moses. And repeatedly said, Moses said, when you come to the New Testament, the Jews in Jesus' day most frequently said, now Moses said, and they looked to him as the lawgiver. When Jesus was taken into the mountain for the transfiguration, who appears? Moses, the lawgiver, and Elijah, the chief of the prophets. And when you read on through the text and you get to the Revelation and you hear them talking about sing the song of Moses and the Lamb, Moses and Jesus. So Moses occupies such a rich place in all of history of brethren. Pardon me. But like everybody else, he had feet of clay and made some mistakes. One of the first things that we see about him was when he observed the Egyptian beating the Hebrew, and apparently his anger was stirred, and he fell on him, killed him, buried him in the sand. Years later, when he was leading the people down the Sinai Peninsula and they were thirsty, God told him, strike the rock. He did, and water came out. Sometime later, they're thirsty again, and they're complaining. And what did Moses say to them? Shall we bring you water? We? Who? Me and God. And he smote the rock instead of just speaking to it as God had said. And for that, God said, you're not going to enter the land of promise. But he was so good in so many ways. He had his weaknesses, as all of us do, but God used him mightily. Open your Bibles, if you would, to Hebrews, the 11th chapter, where we have the famous Hall of Fame of Faith for numbers of people of history. And Moses plays a major role here. Actually, I wish I could have the overhead that I have for this lesson. So if you want notes, I'll give them to you as we go and you can write them down. There are going to be 4 major points to start with. And if you're making notes, leave room for a heading to come back at the top. In Hebrews 11, verse 24, the record says, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, seeing the rewards that would come from the believer, from the Redeemer. And he stayed faithful to God. Moses, by faith. And the record says he was not afraid of the king's command. So he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Now, the record said when he had grown up. When do you think of it, somebody to be grown up? Age 21? Maybe 18? 16 and car keys? Or 10, 11, and 12 in baptism? What do you think of when somebody is grown? When the record says when Moses was growing up, he was 40 years old. And he left Egypt and went south to spend another 40 years in preparation. During that time, he marries, has a family, develops flocks and herds, and then God is going to call him later. During that time, we don't know what all was going on in Egypt, but the record tells us that when God appeared to Moses down in the south, in the burning bush, and called him, Moses said, wait a minute, Lord, who am I that I should deliver the people? And then God gave him some miracles. The rod turning into a snake and the snake turning back into the rod. And told him, I'll be with you. And Moses says, I can't speak very well. I'm not good to talk. He said, I'll let Aaron, your brother, be your spokesman for you. and I'll give you the word, and I'll give him the word. So God brought him back to Egypt to deliver the people from the bondage under a new Pharaoh. Who was the new Pharaoh? We don't know. Think about it. Moses had spent 40 years in the house of Pharaoh. It is entirely possible that the new Pharaoh could have been a kid that grew up with Moses. They may have ridden chariots together and played ball together and kicked it. I don't know if they had a soccer ball back then or not. But it's very possible that at least it's a kinsman that Moses would have known, but it's a new Pharaoh. And God sends him in and tells him, let my people go. Let them go that they can go out into the wilderness and worship me. And Pharaoh uses all kinds of excuses. Well, let them go, but don't go far. Leave your kids here. Don't go far. And they said, no, we don't want to worship in the Egyptian land. We want to be on our own. And then one by one, God brought plagues to soften the heart of Pharaoh and then see it get hardened again. And each time he'd give a little and then take it back, give a little, take it back, starting with the blood, the water turning to blood, and then all the way through the 9th plague. And then God was ready to make the delivery. So on a special day, he told Moses, let every family select a lamb and prepare it. If the family is not big enough to eat it all in one night, bring in another family and share it. Take the blood of the lamb, put it on the doorpost and on the lintel. And when the angel comes through at night, where there is blood on the lintel and the doorpost, I'll pass over you. And during that night, the firstborn of all the people in Egypt and their flocks and their herd, every firstborn died, from Pharaoh's house down to the smallest servant. That was the turning point. And the Pharaoh says, take your stuff and get out. And the women asked for gold and silver and things from the women, and they were given to them. They said, get out. And then after they left, Pharaoh changed and sent the army after them. They get to the Red Sea. They thought they were trapped. But God told Moses, hold your staff over the sea. And he did. And the waters divided, and the land was dry. And the people of Israel walked across on that dry ground. And the Egyptians, trying to follow after them, perished in the water of the sea. Now they're out safely on the east side of on the Sinai Peninsula. And God is going to care for them there. Delivery at the hand of Moses. Then they traipsed down the coast, encountered a number of different obstacles, came to old Mount Sinai, and there God called Moses into the mountain, separated the people from the mountain, gave the voice of the thunders and the 10 Commandments, people fearing said, "You go talk to him. We're afraid." So Moses goes into the mountain to hear God, and God, with the finger of the angel, writes the commandments in the tablets of stone, 2 tablets of stone, while Moses is in the mountain. The people cried out, "What are we doing? Moses has led us out here to die." And this is when they're going to call on Aaron, "Make us a god." And they collected the gold from the women, turned it into an image, and worshiped a golden calf. We'll come back to that later. Moses is in the mountain. When he comes back down, the people have sinned grievously. And we're going to come to that really in the last part of our lesson. But because of their sin, God said, "You'll wander a year for every day that Moses was in the mountain." So that's 40 years. And they did. Various things happened during those 40 years before they finally came to Canaan. But back to Hebrews 11. The night of the Passover, God brought the angel and killed the firstborn. Then the next verse says, by faith, they were delivered. They were delivered, not just Moses. Moses was the caregiver that led them out of the land of Canaan and across that Red Sea. And the Egyptians were killed there. Then 40 years later, they're going to be at the River Jordan. Moses not going to enter the land, but they will. Moses, the great deliverer. What more can you say about a guy like that? What more can you say about a man who stood up for the people and wanted to do the very best for them? But let me add a note to it. That in my mind just sets Moses aside as a unbelievably great guy. When the people had built that golden calf back at Mount Sinai, and Moses came down from the mountain, and you remember he broke the tables of stone, later had to make them again. The record says that God came to Moses and said, "These people have sinned grievously against me." And he didn't say, "Let me tell you what I'm thinking about doing." God said, "Let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to destroy all of them. And I'm going to make of your family my people." Moses did not argue with God. But Moses reasoned with God. He said, Lord, what will your enemies say about you? They know you delivered them from the Pharaoh, brought them safely into the land. And now if you destroy them, they'll say, look, you can deliver them, but you can't keep them. And God gave heed to his word. Moses reminded him, you made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that their children would be the nation and that they would inherit the land. And God said, I've changed my mind. Think of Moses. Instead of the children of Israel, we could have been talking about the children of Moses. But Moses, and I'm going to say in humility, said, no, Lord, keep your promise and deliver those people. Moses was a great fellow. Think of what all he did. Think of the service that he gave to Israel. And think of the role he occupied from then on. Law of Moses, not just law of God, law of Moses. Song of Moses and the Lamb. Great, great man. And when we come back a little bit later, we'll be talking more about what he has done for them and the rewards they got because of the service of Moses. Think of those 4 points. He chose not to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He could have had all the honors there were, and riches, and rewards. But he chose to suffer affliction with the people of God. His heart burned when an Egyptian was beating the Israelite, and he killed him. And then went away into the south and stayed for another 40 years before coming back to go before the Pharaoh. And with God's help and God's ordination, he became the deliverer. And then through his faith and their faith, they were delivered. They crossed the Red Sea and escaped. Moses, humble man, a man with a temper, but a man who controlled himself and who became a super servant to God. Moses, the lawgiver. We'll come back after a break.